Coach of Dragon said, so there's a rumor supposedly going that Disney is going to sell Star Wars back to Lucas, guessing because of their debt troubles or Hulu situation. I'm sure you're looking into it, maybe get some clarification on it before we jump the shark. And that's what he was telling me. Now, I did not know where this rumor had come from. I didn't know what he was talking about. And I said back to him, there is a 1,000% chance that Disney will not sell Star Wars back to George Lucas. Now, I did not know that it was being covered on the Overlord DVD channel by Doomcock and that the person originating this rumor was Kamran Pasha. Had no idea. That was just my comment. Now, this would go on to lead to quite the kerfuffle as I realized, we're back into this situation again. All right, so the audience is wondering, what does all of this mean? Is the rumor true that Disney is looking to sell Star Wars to George Lucas? And all I can tell you is that my sources don't say that. But I want to walk the audience through because I suspect that everybody in the audience is just as brilliant and high intelligence as all of us. And I just want to walk through why it is exceedingly difficult for Disney to sell Star Wars. Not even just to George Lucas, but why it's exceedingly difficult. And then I want to get your opinions on this. Reason number one that it is exceedingly difficult for Disney to sell Star Wars. And folks, if you want to take notes on this so that you will know this in the future, have at it. The tuition is free here. You're all worthy of a scholarship in my book. All right, the Walt Disney Company is valued at almost exactly $170 billion. They purchased Star Wars for almost exactly $4 billion, and they have subsequently ran that franchise completely into the ground. Is anybody here on this panel of the opinion that Star Wars is doing well? Or do we all agree that Disney has harmed Star Wars overall? What do you guys think?
Well, there's two aspects. It's great for comatose patients because eventually they'll wake up because they don't want to hear anymore. And for the rest of us that are awake, it's pretty much becoming a dead to the ground franchise because they've destroyed it.
They have added maybe some value and some assets to it via their theme park entities, right? So with Star Wars Galaxy's Edge and so forth. But even those are very, very limited. So
right, and hold there, Vash, because listen, I don't know how you all are this clever to bring this up for me so I can watch this, though.
The hotel.
Here's the funny thing about that. Star Wars and Lucasfilm, they don't own Galaxy's Edge. They don't own any part of the theme parks. Those are owned by the theme park divisions, Walt Disney World and Disneyland, under the Parks and Division, which includes the cruises. That is like its own separate business inside this giant umbrella that is Disney. Lucasfilm and Star Wars don't own those theme parks. So those really can't be sold. They're physical capital expenditures. They're structures inside these parks. And whoever buys Star Wars, that's off the table. You see what I'm saying? So yes. You made a great point there that you would think that those are increases in the value of Star Wars and Lucasfilm, et cetera, but they cannot be for sale, conceivably.
Right. So the only value inherent to them is limited to the Walt Disney Company that owns both entities in which they operate.
Well, they're not going to sell 14 acres of Disneyland.
No. Well, and that's kind of the funny thing about this whole thing is because the source of this rumor, let's say, suggests that they might actually do that, at least with their international properties.
Disney has an approximate value as an entire company of right now $170 billion. By the way, that drops when the stock drops. They bought Star Wars for $4 billion. Everybody get your math ready. Everybody ready for the math? So this is why you come to this channel, by the way. The reason you come here is because we're going to break up the math. I mean, we're literally going to do the numbers and show you. Okay. So given that they can't sell the theme park lands, right? I mean, they just can't do it. They can tear them down, but that's not, you're still not selling them. So you can't sell those, and as long as they exist, you would presume that there's no way that any other company can do Star Wars theme park lands. I mean, Disney's never going to do that. There's no way that happens. So just on that alone, when Disney purchased Star Wars for $4 billion, included in that were theme park rights. Now let's just take away the entire argument that Disney has damaged Star Wars, and let's just say that Disney cannot sell theme park rights. That's off the table because the theme parks currently have them in their most prime real estate. Okay. Therefore, This cannot be worth $4 billion anymore. Does anybody think that Star Wars is worth more than $4 billion at this time?
No.
Only in a nightmare. The only argument that I would make is for inflation and maybe the idea that even at $4 billion, it might have been a little bit undervalued considering the value of ILM. Well, I would have said Indiana Jones, but we'll get more to that later.
Right. Okay. So hang on to that thought because that's worthy and we'll come back to it. But here's where the math comes in. If they sell everything that they bought from George Lucas back in 2012, if they sell it for, let's say, $3.5 billion, okay, let's just play with that. If they sell it for any kind of amount that demonstrates to Wall Street that they did not grow this franchise, okay, everybody hanging with me? So they sell it at an amount that does not match what Jonas brought up with the inflation, okay? It did not inflate at the rate of the rest of the economy. Then what Wall Street is going to do is Wall Street's going to say, investors are going to look at it and say, well, that's absolute proof then that Disney has damaged one of their key pillars, one of their key brands. And then you're going to see investors be spooked because they're going to think, well, now that's hard evidence that that's happening with Star Wars. And I've heard the same thing about Marvel, and I've heard the same thing about the live action remakes, and I've heard the same thing about yada, 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 right? To quote Seinfeld. Not only then is Disney separating itself from Star Wars and from Lucasfilm and losing the value that's inherent in that, but you're also going to see the investors then concerned because you have, for the very first time, put up objective data that shows that Disney damaged a brand. $170 billion. If Disney, as a result of selling Star Wars, lost only 2% of its entire company value, that comes out to be $3.7 billion. And that means that if Disney sells Star Wars and if their stock only drops by 2%, just 2%, then they will lose as much money as they make if they sell it at a loss.
Oof.
Everybody see what I'm saying here?
I see.
This is a catch-22 for the Walt Disney Company. I'm sorry we had to walk it through that long, but it's hard to understand. But Disney has to sell Star Wars for a major profit, not to make enough to buy Hulu. Hulu's going to cost them $30 billion, okay? I mean, but what we're talking about right here is Disney has to sell Star Wars for enough that they offset the loss that the company will surely suffer on Wall Street, which, by the way, will subsequently also make it more difficult to buy Hulu. And that's why you come to this channel, because that is not something you'll hear very often. That's the kind of minutia we're willing to go to. Let
me restate it so that I think I understand here. You're saying that the Wall Street stock price, which is based more on the perception of value by Wall Street analysts than it is on actual value, that the perceived value loss of admitting that Star Wars has been driven to the ground and being sold would be more detrimental to the stock price and therefore the value of the company as a whole than it would gain them in selling Lucasfilm.
Well, not only that, but in addition, you have a real loss of potentiality because you've just removed any ability in the minds of investors that you can ever make money on Star Wars again because it's gone. You just sold it.
You know what? This is what we were talking about the other day is that they have devalued it now. I mean, really, at the end of the day, Star Wars wasn't worth the $4.05 billion they paid for it in the first place.
That's what Bob Iger
or Lucasfilm as a whole really wasn't even. Yeah.
So
and then at the end of the day, now that's worth half that, if that.
If you speak of the devil, he shall appear. But if you speak and don't know what you're talking about, and you're me, Script Doctor appears out of the blue to help us learn more.
If it was a normal company, you'd be correct. But this is a studio film, and the industry doesn't work that way.
One of the great things about the way we try to handle things on this channel is whenever there's a disagreement, we believe that we can enter into that area in a polite, respectful manner, and that it's an opportunity for not only for all of us to grow, but the audience to grow. It's, in my opinion, when you enter into a disagreement where you can be respectful of each other, that is the most interesting conversation you'll find on the web. And so I want to stick with this for a moment. Script, educate us. Why does it not work the way that we've presented so far?
Because in the Hollywood mentality, it's all about saving the brand. And if a subsidiary of that brand is failing, it's better to just cut it off and say it was a bad limb, gone gangrene. But now that it's gone, Disney's now better.
Okay, but outside of Hollywood, we're talking about investors. We're talking about Wall Street. How much would it drop the stock, in your opinion, we're totally out in theory land right now.
Oh yeah.
How much would it drop the stock if Disney sells Star Wars and not for an amount that they purchased it for? How much does that spook the investors then?
Well, we'd actually have to take a look at the Disney stock market circa 2010 and see when the drop happened when they sold Power Rangers, because a drop did happen. And
well, except that, and Script, let me push back on that.
Sure.
The only issue there is that Power Rangers was not one of their pillars of the company. Now, Power Rangers was big, but Star Wars and Lucasfilm is sitting as one of their major pillars on their Disney Plus streaming service that is supposedly where all the tributaries of Disney flow into.
Oh, absolutely. Like that's there's no doubt about that. I mean, it's literally a pillar of their streaming network, and they physically invested in property at their park side of things, which when it came to Power Rangers, they didn't build anything for Power Rangers. All they did was get a bunch of cast members in costumes and throw them over at their Hollywood Studios part of the park and have them roaming around. The thing here is that Iger thought he learned from the mistakes of Power Rangers and then decided to not repeat them with regards to Disney. But the first mistake he made, of course, was allowing Kathleen Kennedy to have any say over what would happen on the park side of things for Disney Lucasfilm, which she should legally not have any control over because she is not part of the parks. She is head of Lucasfilm Studios. She essentially, Lucasfilm is quote unquote licensing out Disney to the parks to do with whatever they wish.
That goes a little deeper than usual, but let's just clarify that for everybody. What happened was Imagineers, that's the engineering firm that's cleverly named for the Walt Disney Company. They had a plan for a Star Wars land that I think would have pleased all of us. And Kathleen Kennedy came in, convinced Iger to jettison that idea, and then she tied the Lucasfilm Story Group under Kiri Hart to the hip of the Imagineering department, so that the Galaxy's Edge that we have today was designed not primarily by Imagineers, who, by the way, have massive expertise in this. They're the top of the world, but they were under the direction then of non-theme park people who had no idea what they were doing, who decided that this Galaxy's Edge would be set in a specific point of time prior to them knowing that The Last Jedi would be a horrific failure and highly contentious, and therefore their land would suffer because of it. All right, now go ahead.
Yeah, and that's basically it. I mean, the first misstep is the fact that why was Iger saying, yes, listen to her, when it's like, no, Disney World and Disneyland, respectively, have been profit-making enterprises since their conception. You would never get a third party that has no experience in it, regardless of their control of the IP, to ever be involved in the Imagineering of that. If anything, it's basically like you show them, hey, this is what we're doing. Is this Star Wars accurate? And they go yes or no, and that's it. And the Imagineers go back to work. That is how its relationship is still supposed to become. But when it comes to the fact that Iger was around during Power Rangers, one of the things that people kind of get confused about and conflate is that Haim Saban did not sell Power Rangers to Fox Kids, which is what Disney essentially bought at the time. Haim Saban just had a distribution deal with them. When Disney bought Fox Kids and some of the properties, they had to create an additional deal for Power Rangers because Haim Saban thought, okay, I've done it for 7-8 years. It's time for me to go, take my money, do new things. And that's what he did. He sold it for a few $1 billion. And then what happened is that he saw over the decade, the following decade, the property that he created get diminished year over year over year, and then become canceled for the very first time. And he basically said, I will not have my name associated with a failure of this level, even if it was caused by Disney. I'm buying it back. And he opened up negotiations because Disney had canceled it, and they already had said, we are planning to sell some of the IPs that did not did not return the investment that we expected, and they just had to get rid of it. And that was the idea at the time, is they just needed to get rid of it to preserve the Disney brand, essentially. And here's the other thing that's kind of interesting, is that when Haim bought Power Rangers back, he technically bought all the Disney produced seasons of Power Rangers as well. So he got not only did he get half of his money back in profit, but he got 9 extra seasons of Power Rangers that he can now distribute himself.
So we can assume that if Star Wars was sold, it would be sold with the content that's already been created by Disney?
Oof.
Most likely, yes.
One of the tricks here is that Disney is in a spot they were not in when they were dealing with Power Rangers.
Correct.
That being that Disney needs to buy Hulu, and the clock is ticking, and Disney needs approximately, okay, let's not go with with Comcast demand, okay, which would put them somewhere in the realm of 25 billion or more. But let's say that in arbitration they get it down, and let's say it's 18 billion. Disney needs $18 billion to buy out the rest of Hulu, and they're
Only
on the hook for it.
$18 billion.
Okay,
What a relief.
So what we're talking about right now is very much sort of glued to the fabric of Disney can't make decisions that cost Disney money. When we say that it's difficult for Disney to sell Star Wars, I mean that. But when I say that it's almost impossible that they could ever sell it to George Lucas, I also mean that. We're talking about orders of magnitude more in terms of difficulty. George Lucas would essentially be buying back a studio which has been engineered by Kathleen Kennedy to hate everything he did with Star Wars. She has filled it. She has filled the studio with people who hate George and George's vision, and he would have to buy that. Guys, what do you think?
Why would he want it anyway? I mean, really, at the end of the day, he's almost 90 years old, right?
Lucas will be 80, I think, later this year if he hasn't turned 80.
Okay,
already.
80, not 90, but still.
Unlike trees that you gauge their age with the rings, you actually look at George Lucas's gobbler.
There's trees in my yard younger than me.
However far it's hangling down. Okay, so anyway,
part of
you had a thought.
Part of selling Star Wars, that's connected to Lucasfilm and that entire entity from him was to kind of relieve himself from the burden of actually owning it and so forth, especially for his family, as it was starting to affect them quite substantially near the end there. So
and they would bear the burden of that. They would have to take this essentially because
exactly.
He's 80.
So I don't know why he would bear the burden yet again and reverse course on that from having made that decision 10 years ago now.